Something happened behind the scenes, and you still do not know the full story. While you were living your life, minding your own business, being yourself, someone connected to your destiny was forced to see the truth about you in a way they could no longer ignore. And what they discovered did not just catch their attention, it changed their heart. It changed how they looked at you. It changed how they looked at everyone around them. Listen closely, because this message is not small. Someone thought they understood you from a distance. They thought they had you figured out. But the closer they looked, the more they realized you were not like the people they had known before. You were not wearing a mask. You were not performing for approval. You were not saying one thing and doing another. You were steady, real, honest, in a quiet way that could not be copied. And once they saw that, once they truly saw it, something inside them started breaking away from what no longer felt right. Stay with me, because the deeper truth is this. They did not cut someone off because of drama alone. They cut someone off because learning who you really are exposed what was false in their own life. And once that kind of truth enters a person's heart, it does not leave. It grows. It pushes. It changes everything. So, if this feels like your story, keep listening, because what happened next says more than you realize. At first, they were not searching for a big revelation. They were simply watching quietly, naturally. They noticed the way you spoke to people when there was nothing to gain. They noticed how you carried yourself in hard moments. They noticed how you stayed true to your values when it would have been easier to bend, pretend, or follow what everyone else was doing. These were not loud signs. They were small things, but small things reveal the biggest truths. Anyone can act kind for a moment. Anyone can create a good image when eyes are on them. But real character shows up in patterns, in repeated choices, in how someone behaves when no reward is waiting on the other side. That is what they started seeing in you. Pattern after pattern, choice after choice, moment after moment. And slowly, the picture became clear. They began to understand that who you seemed to be was actually who you were. That hit them harder than expected because deep down, they had grown used to inconsistency. They had grown used to mixed signals, half-truths, polished words, and empty promises. But with you, they kept seeing alignment. Your words matched your actions. Your energy matched your heart. Your presence felt the same up close as it did from far away. And that kind of truth is rare, very rare. If you have ever wondered whether your authenticity matters, hear this clearly. It matters more than you know. Sometimes your truth is speaking into rooms you have never entered. There may have been people around them talking about you, offering opinions, sharing pieces of information without knowing the full story, planting thoughts based on assumptions, jealousy, fear, or their own limited view. And, for a little while, your person may have listened. Not because they wanted to turn against you, but because when people feel unsure, they often look outside themselves for answers. That happens. But the more they observed you directly, the weaker those outside voices became, because truth becomes stronger when it is tested. And the closer they looked, the harder it became to believe anything that did not match what they were actually seeing. This is where everything began to shift. They were no longer comparing you to rumors. They were comparing rumors to reality, and reality kept winning. They saw consistency, they saw depth, they saw a kind of inner honesty that did not need to defend itself every 5 minutes. And once that realization settled in, it started affecting more than their opinion of you. It started affecting their whole emotional world. Suddenly, certain conversations in their life felt shallow. Certain people felt performative. Certain connections started feeling heavy instead of safe. This is what truth does. It creates contrast. It exposes what once hid in plain sight. So, without even planning it, they began looking at everything differently. The people they kept close, the bonds they were feeding, the stories they had accepted, And every time they reflected on you, one thought kept returning like an echo they could not silence. This person is real. Keep listening, because that thought became the start of a chain reaction. The more they realized your character was genuine, the more uncomfortable other parts of their life became. Not all at once, not in some dramatic movie scene. Quietly, slowly, but powerfully, they started thinking more deeply about the people around them, about who really supported their growth, and who only liked the version of them that stayed small, confused, or easy to control. They started asking questions they had avoided for too long. Who feels honest? Who feels draining? Who is here out of love? And who is here out of habit? Who speaks life into me? And who keeps me stuck in circles that no longer fit my future? These were not easy questions. They carried weight because the answers were going to change something. And somewhere inside, they knew it. What they discovered about you was not just teaching them about your nature. It was teaching them about their standards, their needs, their future. They began to see that some connections in their world were surviving on routine, not real alignment. Surviving on comfort, not truth. Surviving because it felt easier to hold on than to admit the season had ended. If this is reaching you, stay with me, because this is the part many people miss. Big endings do not always begin with loud fights. Sometimes they begin with quiet clarity. A person simply wakes up to what they can no longer unsee. And that is where your soulmate was heading. With every new realization about you, the old excuses in their life began falling apart. They were becoming more aware, more honest, and less willing to keep calling something fine when deep inside it no longer felt right. There was someone in their life during all of this, someone whose place had become familiar, someone they had kept around, not necessarily because the bond was deep, but because it was known, predictable, easy to return to, a connection built more on habit than true peace. And for a while, they kept moving through that routine like nothing had changed. They still showed up, still played the role, still tried to keep things normal. But normal was already breaking apart inside them. Every time they thought about your authenticity, the difference became harder to ignore. What felt real with you made what felt forced elsewhere stand out even more. It was not about perfect versus imperfect. It was about true versus empty. It was about emotional honesty versus emotional convenience. The person they eventually cut off may not even have realized what was happening at first, because from the outside, everything can look the same while an entire inner world is being rebuilt. But inside your soulmate, the gap was widening. Conversations that once felt meaningful started sounding repetitive. Energy that once felt comforting started feeling draining. Dynamics they used to excuse started feeling impossible to defend. They were not hunting for flaws. They were not trying to create an ending. In fact, part of them wanted to avoid change completely because change is hard. Letting go is hard. Admitting that something has expired is hard. But truth has its own timing. It does not wait for comfort. It arrives when it arrives. And once it settles in, it demands honesty. So night after night, thought after thought, they sat with the truth they were not fully ready to say out loud. Something in their life no longer matched who they were becoming. That is when the inner conflict got louder. They replayed conversations. They examined old patterns. They questioned why certain interactions left them feeling tired, small, or disconnected. They asked themselves whether they were staying loyal to a connection that had already lost its soul. They asked whether they were holding on because it was love or because it was familiar. And that question changed everything, because once a person starts asking that honestly, the answer begins finding them slowly at first. Then, all at once, they started realizing that some people had only fit the older version of them, the version that tolerated misalignment, ignored intuition, and stayed too long where truth was missing. But they were changing now, and the more they changed, the less that old connection made sense. This is what discovering you awakened in them. Courage. Not loud courage, not reckless courage, real courage. The kind that helps a person tell the truth to themselves first. The kind that says, I cannot keep pretending this still feels right. The kind that admits, I have outgrown this, even if letting go hurts. If you are still here, hear this part closely. They did not make the decision in one emotional burst. They arrived there through many quiet moments of clarity. And that often makes a decision even stronger, because when a person has had time to think, feel, compare, reflect, and still lands on the same truth, that truth becomes impossible to dismiss. By now, the question was no longer, should I notice this? The question had become, how much longer can I keep ignoring what my heart already knows? That is a powerful place to reach, because once someone gets there, action is near. Eventually, they reach the point where pretending became heavier than honesty. There may not have been one dramatic argument, there may not have been betrayal in the obvious sense, there may not have been some explosive ending everyone could point to and explain. What happened was deeper than that. Clarity arrived, pure, steady clarity, the kind that does not scream, but still changes a life. They understood that the connection they were holding onto no longer reflected who they were becoming. It no longer supported the standard rising in them, and no matter how much guilt, doubt, or sadness came with the realization, they could not unknow it. So, they made a choice, a difficult one, a quiet one, a necessary one. They cut someone off, not because it was easy, not because they enjoyed hurting anyone, not because they wanted chaos, but because truth had finally become stronger than comfort. And when they did, they felt something unexpected. Relief. Not instant joy, not celebration. Relief. The kind that comes when inner conflict starts settling, the kind that comes when a person finally stops resisting what they already know. That relief mattered. It told them they had not made the decision out of impulse. They had made it out of alignment. And once that space opened, emotional space, mental space, spiritual space, they began thinking about you even more. Not in a wild or careless way, in a meaningful way, because with distraction removed, your presence stood out even more clearly in their heart. Remember this, the person they released was never the true center of this story. The center was awakening. The center was the truth they discovered through you. The center was the moment your realness forced them to examine everything false they had been tolerating. After that ending, they entered a different season inside themselves, a quieter one, a deeper one. The noise around them started fading, and with that silence came understanding they had been avoiding for a long time. They began to see how often fear had shaped their choices. Fear of change, fear of losing what was familiar, fear of making the wrong move, fear of walking away from something simply because it was not fully right, even if it was no longer fully wrong. But once those fears were exposed, they began losing power, because fear works best in darkness, and truth brings light. Your soulmate started understanding that what they found in you was not perfection. It was something even more powerful: integrity, steadiness, a person whose inner life and outer life were not at war. And that reminded them of what they truly wanted for themselves. It reminded them of the kind of life they wanted to build, the kind of relationships they wanted to choose, the kind of honesty they wanted to live by. This is why your impact reached so deep. You did not force them. You did not chase them into change. You simply stayed true to yourself. And your truth became a mirror that showed them what was missing, a mirror that showed them what was possible, a mirror that showed them the gap between surviving and truly living. If this message is reaching your spirit, stay to the end, because this part matters. Sometimes the most powerful influence is not loud advice. Sometimes it is simply the presence of someone genuine, someone who reminds another person that real still exists. And once someone feels that kind of reality, they cannot keep settling for what feels hollow. As time passed, they stopped asking why this happened and started asking what they were supposed to do with it. That was the next major shift, because awareness alone does not transform a life. Action does. They had already made one hard choice by letting a connection go. But now they were being asked to go even deeper, to change the way they thought, to change what they accepted, to change how they responded when something felt off. The old patterns no longer fit. The old excuses sounded weak. The old distractions lost some of their charm. Little by little, they became more honest with themselves. They saw how often conflict had disguised itself as peace, how often familiarity had disguised itself as love, how often fear had disguised itself as logic. And once they saw that clearly, it was impossible to go back. You need to understand this. What they found out about you did not just make them admire you, it woke them up. It made them realize they had been settling in subtle ways they never fully named. Settling for inconsistency, settling for emotional half-measures, settling for connections that looked stable on the surface but felt empty underneath. And now that their eyes were open, they could not force them shut again. This is where real transformation begins, not with fantasy, not with daydreams, not with wishful thinking, with clear vision, with inner truth, with the decision to stop betraying what your heart already knows. So every new day, every quiet reflection, every memory of your energy kept leading them back to the same understanding. You did not enter their awareness to entertain them. You entered it to shift them. And whether they expected that or not, it was happening. They also began to understand that your influence was not about appearances, timing, or surface attraction alone. It was about what your presence represented, realness, sincerity, a rare kind of emotional alignment that cut through confusion. The more they thought about you, the more they realized they were not only moved by who you are, but by what you awakened inside them. You reminded them of their own depth, their own values, their own need for something honest. That is why the discovery hit so hard. It touched something already waiting to be remembered, and once remembered, it could not be forgotten. They began looking at their whole life through a cleaner lens, their habits, their boundaries, their standards, their future. They could now see that staying attached to what was no longer aligned would only delay the life they were truly meant to build. And this did not make everything easy overnight. Growth is rarely tidy. Some days brought peace, some days brought doubt, some days brought sadness for what had ended. But even through the waves, the deeper truth remained steady. They had changed, truly changed. The version of them that once ignored red flags, excused emotional emptiness, and confused routine with connection was fading. In its place stood someone more awake, more discerning, more willing to choose truth, even when truth required loss first. If you are still with me, do not miss this line. Sometimes the reason a person leaves one connection is not because another person asked them to, it is because another person's authenticity gave them the courage to finally admit what was already dying. That is the deeper story here, and that story is still unfolding. Now, they stand in a place where confusion cannot rule them the way it once did. The noise is quieter, the illusions are weaker, the excuses do not work like they used to. They know that genuine connection is not built on convenience. They know that trust cannot be replaced by routine. They know that emotional alignment matters more than familiar patterns that no longer feed the soul. And as these truths become stronger in them, so does the meaning of what they discovered about you. They see now that your authenticity was never a small detail. It was the turning point. It was the moment the old mask of their life started slipping off. It was the moment they began understanding that every ending makes room for a beginning and every honest choice creates space for something truer to enter. This is why they cannot just move on as if nothing happened. Something did happen. Something real. Something deep. Something that changed the structure of their inner world. You showed them, without trying, that honest people still exist, that consistency still exists, that values can still be lived, not just spoken. And once someone experiences that kind of reminder, their whole definition of love, loyalty, and future begins to rise. They stop reaching for what merely fills time. They start craving what actually feeds the heart. That is where they are now, in between what was and what could be, in the sacred space after release and before full arrival. And if you have felt this shift in the air, trust that feeling. Some transformations happen quietly, long before they become visible. Some of the biggest decisions are made in silence before anyone else hears a word about them. And the truth is, this journey is not only about what they learned about you, it is also about what your existence helped them remember about themselves. They remembered that they were not meant to live half awake. They remembered that peace matters. They remembered that deep down, they have always known when something was off, even if they took too long to act on it. They remembered that their heart was not asking for perfection, it was asking for truth, and that memory changed everything. Now, when they look back, they can see how each small observation, each moment of reflection, each emotional contrast was leading them here, not to fantasy, not to illusion, but to a more honest life. A life where they choose what is real over what is easy. A life where they stop staying loyal to patterns that no longer match their spirit. A life where they finally trust what clarity has been trying to say all along. And yes, part of that clarity carries your energy all through it, because you became the proof that substance still exists in a world full of surface. You became the reminder that someone can be soft and strong, calm and powerful, simple and unforgettable all at once. That kind of presence stays with a person. It lingers. It teaches. It moves things. So, if you have been wondering whether your truth reached them, the answer is yes. It did more than you know. And what it touched inside them is still unfolding, still growing, still shaping choices they cannot fully escape. Sometimes, the greatest gift one person gives another is not a promise, not a label, not a dramatic confession. Sometimes it is the truth their presence reveals. And once that truth is felt, nothing stays the same forever.